Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Christian Heritage Podcast. It is just me today, and I am with Miss Rhoni. Rhoni was with us a few episodes ago. Rhoni, welcome back.
Well, it's good to be here.
We're recording this on September 28th. It's going to be 90 degrees today. We're ready for fall, and our Christian Heritage colors are fall, and yet we just can't get there weather-wise. So wherever you're listening, we hope that you're drinking your pumpkin spice latte and enjoying the fall weather. So we're going to be talking about Rhoni's specialty today, stepping into hard places with adults. We had talked about Rhoni's really just your job title last time. We said you're our family mentor coordinator here, but just to start, if you could give people, and I didn't say I was going to ask you this, but if you could just give people a background of your work with adults, why you're passionate about mentoring, and really kind of your arc, your trajectory here at Christian Heritage and working with adults in hard places.
So my passion really comes from my personal experience, and my personal experience included being an adult in a hard place. I left a marriage of 14 years and became a single mom. Um, During those 14 years, I'd been a stay-at-home homeschooling mom. I had minimal education, and so I did not feel that I had any skills that anybody could ever use in the job field, which was one of the things that kept me in a really unsafe, unhealthy marriage. So when I stepped out, the ultimate of insecure, and I was the welfare mom who was on food stamps and Medicaid and Section 8 housing, all of the things that make life really challenging. And I had a
Yeah.
couple people that stepped into my life there and encouraged me. One of them was actually my caseworker for my Medicaid and my food stamps. And she is probably the first person that recognized maybe some abilities and maybe some qualities in me that might be useful. So she got me connected to the human services field. And then just watching how people connect to someone who's been there and the difference that made in people's lives, the fact that they were willing to trust me a little bit more because I had been walking through some hard stuff. And then as the ACEs research was released and I took on more positions, I've worked for 4 different human services agencies and had some incredible training and some incredible experiences in each one. Those helped me understand a little bit more about why I landed in the position I did,
Yep.
how it was that I was able to get through what I did, and also,
Mm.
begin to learn more and more about the impact of traumatic experiences on adults. For a while, we only talked about childhood trauma and how to
Mhm.
help children. And I kept saying, okay, but the people that I am working with are the individuals that had horrible childhood trauma
Yeah.
and didn't have anybody walking alongside them. And now they're adults and they are people that are struggling and are not welcome in some areas of society because of their struggles. How can we take what we're learning about children and apply it to adults?
It's great. You could probably hear from Rhoni's voice and just the way that you sound. Like you are such a calming presence. And I honestly, I think my wife was the one that was like, Rhoni should read children's books, like narrate them. But I think your presence with adults, like I've, mostly heard Rhoni over the phone speaking with a parent, but you just have such a presence, a warm, welcoming, compassionate presence and tone. I always say you're the perfect person for what you do here at Christian Heritage. And so I'm excited for this conversation. So in case people didn't listen to the episode that we did on trauma, maybe we could just talk through trauma, define it again. What is it, before we get to specifics on how we work with adults. So what is trauma again?
So our definition of trauma is this. It's trauma occurs if the way an individual experiences an event causes a negative effect on their ability to function. So if you noticed, I kind of emphasized three words and they all start with E. And one of those words was event. And so when we think of a traumatic event, we think of, you know, something, a natural disaster. Those are traumatic. The fire in Maui recently, that was
Yeah.
a traumatic event. We think of community violence. Those are traumatic events. School shootings. Yeah, we just saw in our local news recently that
Mm,
there was a traumatic event where one of our public servants, one of our social workers,
yep.
got shot in the leg. That's a
Yep.
traumatic event. But we can take that word event and we can adjust it and we can change it, and the definition stays the exact same. And it
Mm,
is, if we take event and we turn it to adversity. Now,
yep.
I have not experienced a major natural disaster. I've not experienced community violence. I've had a little bit of adversity in my life here and there.
Yep.
James, have you had adversity in your life
I've
before?
had a little bit of adversity. Yep.
And adversity isn't always bad. Adversity can be really good. Some adversity helps us become more, and here's another word that we hear as we're talking about trauma, and it's a really important word. Some adversity helps build resilience.
Yep.
Resilience is the ability to overcome obstacles. Some adversity makes us stronger and makes us more able to overcome obstacles. But some adversity, if it is experienced differently, becomes traumatic.
Yep.
It's all in how we experience the adversity.
I love it. So when I'm going to skip around a little bit here in our notes, Ronnie's and my notes. We're hopefully not throwing you for a loop, but a theme that often comes up, as we try to mobilize people, is that the people we serve who have experienced trauma, adversity, they may be overreacting to get attention. We hear that. Honestly, we might say that about children, even our own children. Oh, they're just overreacting to get attention. So first, in your field, working with adults, how do you respond to that? Maybe somebody just says it offhandedly at a church thing or an info meeting that we hold, or even in a training. How do you respond to that thought initially?
I think perception is everything. Perception is everything. And I'm excuse me. Let's look at it. So when you look at us on the screen or when you listen to us on a podcast, you miss a little bit. So let me color a picture. If you were to walk in, if one of our listeners was to walk into a room and see James and I standing in the room talking, there may be a couple things you would notice about us. James is a man, I'm a woman. You can tell
Mhm.
that on the podcast.
Yep.
What you can't see on the podcast is, James, how tall are you?
About 6 feet.
And I haven't made it to 5 foot yet. So there's a dramatic difference.
I could actually walk into a room and miss Ronnie. I could not see Ronnie.
Happens all the time.
Yep.
James is in his 30s, and I am, well,
Still in my 30s, thankfully.
almost old enough to be James's mom.
Yep.
Not quite, but almost.
Yep.
James is got 4 kids that he's chasing around all the time. James is active. James is in good shape. And my spare time is spent crocheting. And there's some assumptions that
Ronnie
you can
is an
put together with
amazing, not only is she an amazing mentor, she's an amazing crocheter.
that. So there's some differences. So let's pretend that James and I were going to go lift weights together. And we're going to start with the dead weight, right? So James, we get to the gym, and James goes to the bar and he looks at the bar and he adjusts the weight. He needs adversity, right? We don't just lift
Yep.
weights for the heck of it. We lift weights to strengthen us.
Yep.
So in order to strengthen us, we have to have adversity. And so he puts enough weight on this bar that's going to be cause a little bit of adversity.
Yep.
And he does a couple reps, and now it's my turn. And this weight for James provided enough adversity to create resilience. And so if that weight created resilience for James, it should be good for me too, right?
Mm,
So I go and I stand at that weight and I put all of my umph into it and I try to lift, and what happens?
literally nothing
Literally nothing with the bar.
with the bar.
What happens in my body?
Little traumatic.
It can be I may have in that one attempt at lifting, because I don't have good muscle mass and whatever, I
Yep.
could injure myself.
Yep.
So when we look at somebody and say they are, I experienced the exact same thing they did,
Yeah.
and it actually made me stronger.
Mm,
And they're saying it was traumatic, or they're throwing out, trauma words like PTSD or something.
yep.
That can't even be right. But the thing is that we have to look at the differences. We can clearly see the differences in the physical
Yeah.
aspect of James and I, but we can't always see the differences in a human's in two different people's emotional maturity and emotional strength and emotional abilities.
That's great. I love that illustration. I think it helps a ton. The other side of it, and maybe not the other side of it, but a different perspective is sometimes people may accuse us in the field of saying, "Well, are you just excusing sin by kind of accommodating for their trauma?" And maybe we could get into some specific examples. But I know that you've heard this, and it's a passion of yours uh, to address this issue. We talked about it a little bit last time when you were on with Emma, but let's talk about it a little more. Why is talking about trauma, not an excuse for sin?
Hmm.
And again, we're approaching this from a Christian perspective. We're Christian heritage. We're Christians, and so we believe sin exists. Jesus died for sin, but there's some nuance here, and we want to be able to walk the line appropriately while still honoring God, but helping and being compassionate with people. So let's talk about that a little bit, Ronnie.
And James, I don't have a theology degree, so
No, but I will
I might
interrupt.
need a little bit of correction
Let me
here.
interrupt here. Ronnie and I have this common bond. So I was a pastor for a little while. My wife and I were in campus ministry together, and Ronnie is the daughter of a pastor. My wife is the granddaughter of a church planner. And so we do have a lot of commonalities and some similar church trauma, if we're honest.
Yeah.
So I think Ronnie is actually a great theologian. So, but I do want to hear your answer here.
So when I think of the word sin, I think of it as an intentional. I think that there's
Mm,
a level of motivation behind sin. I think it's trying to uh, get what I need in
mhm,
whatever way I can get it. When I look at the impact of trauma, you asked for examples. I worked with a dad probably 15, 20 years ago who was caring for his stepsons while their mother was in jail. And one of the problems he was having, I think these boys were maybe 8 and 10 or 10 and 12, something like that. He said, "They lie to me all the time. Every time I turn around, I can't trust anything they say." And I said, "Okay, tell me a little bit about their background. How long have you known them? What was their life like before?" He said, "Oh, the first time I met them, they were living with just their mom, and she was my neighbor. And they had to open their window and sneak out their window, and then they would literally knock on the doors of the neighborhood and ask people for food."
mm,
I said, "Their mom wasn't feeding them?" "No, their mom has kind of an anger problem. It's why she's in jail right now." And so if they asked for food, or if they told her that they were hungry, she might not have the ability to feed them. She might have been
yep,
out of food. But if so she felt bad because she couldn't meet their need. For her, that came out as anger.
Yep.
And so he said if they told their mom what was going on in their body, she might get mad at them and beat them.
Sure.
So for these children, lying became the only way they could survive.
Yeah.
They had to not tell mom the truth, and then they had to sneak out and sometimes steal food. And for two young children, this becomes a survival skill.
Yep.
Now we want people to grow up and be adults
Yep.
and become mature. But when there is trauma like that, and this is adversity, what I'm describing is adversity that these
Yep.
children experienced, and it became traumatic because of the way they experienced it. It was overwhelming for them. They had to ask
Good.
strangers for food. So if they grow up, their brain is still impacted by that trauma.
Yeah.
Their neural pathways have become very deep, and they're doing the best they can to survive. For them, if you ask them a question, it feels threatening
Yep.
and they need to protect themselves. So, is lying a sin? Yes, lying is a sin. Is lying for individuals who have experienced some types of trauma the only way they know how to protect themselves?
Mm.
Yes, it is. And they aren't going to learn to
Yep.
protect themselves with the truth
Yep.
until they are in a safe space. You talked
Yep.
to Emma last week
That's
and the
good.
week before about felt safety.
Yep.
And for them, the world is just not a safe space.
That's great. And I actually think of a biblical example in the early part of Exodus when the midwives, we did this come up in our last episode? I don't remember.
Nope.
They
Not,
were,
we didn't make it to Exodus. We got stuck in
they,
Genesis.
the midwives lied to save babies,
Hmm.
but there's no part of that text that says, and God really frowned upon that lying. No, actually, God blessed those Egyptian midwives. Now, maybe because it's a narrative, people want to draw their own conclusions, but they did what they needed to do to help someone else survive. And
Hmm.
and
Exactly.
maybe themselves, I don't know. I would say this, Ronnie, I have a theology degree and I don't have the answers.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I think for maybe those of you who listening, you're like, well, I'm a pastor and I have a theology degree and I disagree. Like, I don't think that the scriptures actually address it the way that we see things today because of what we know about. And you mentioned, you threw out this word neural pathways. Like, oh, there's no talk about neural pathways in science in the scriptures where it's mostly story and very specific teaching to a particular context. Jesus
James,
met
I,
people.
I don't have a theology degree, but I
Yep.
did go to Bible school.
Mm,
And one of the things that I learned in Bible school is God reveals himself in scripture
yep.
and God reveals himself in creation. And so as we are studying psychology, as we are
Yep.
studying
Yeah.
how the brain works and how the brain processes everything, we are studying not only God's creation, but we're also studying what God says is his image.
Yeah.
And so as we learn more and more about this, God is revealing himself and his plan for us through how he created us.
Yep. Yep. I love that. Well, let's go back kind of to the big picture here before we get into specifics of maybe some mentoring qualities. What are some common challenges that you see with adults that you've worked with? What challenges do they face? How do you address them as a mentor? Um, and maybe we could start with just as you work in the program of Families Together, you're working with mostly moms, some dads every day. What are the kinds of things that are hard for them?
So trauma is hard on every aspect of a person's being. Um, and it's hard on it because when there's trauma, especially in childhood, the children do not have the ability to process through what's happening. They aren't reason able. And I'm going to go back to the science. This part of our brain, this where your forehead is,
Yep.
this houses what we call our prefrontal cortex, and this is how we reason, and this is how we
And if you're not
process
if you're not watching, Ronnie's pointing to the front part of her
right by my forehead.
brain.
Yeah,
Yep.
right behind my forehead.
Forehead.
Um, that is what helps us process and reason and plan and decision make. But that doesn't fully develop until we're 27. And until that point, our brains mush. The
It's so
reality
long.
is it's a long time. And
Yep.
and there's different degrees of less mushy as we develop. But especially in childhood, they process everything from a self-centered perspective. So if bad things, if
Mm.
adversities happen to them that they don't have the ability to process from an adult perspective, and they don't have an adult to help them process that, then they start believing false narratives. They start
Mm.
believing things about themselves like, I have no value. If I was a better person, these things
Yep.
wouldn't happen. A lot of shame narratives. Then there's also things that they believe about the world. The world isn't safe. I can't, I have to be super cautious. I have to be on high alert
Mm.
all the time, or something else bad is going to happen to me. So we carry that again, that stunts their emotional growth. It stunts some of the development. It's actually a brain injury.
Mm.
It stunts the development. They go into adulthood carrying these beliefs, deeply held beliefs. Well, that leads to a whole lot of problems. Let's talk about, the first answer to your question is because of that, we end up with mental health issues.
Yep.
So I see a lot of anxiety. Oh, where's that come from? Well, that comes from a lack of felt safety.
Mm.
That comes from, we talk about the three pillars that
Yep.
you and Emma talked about: connection, felt safety, and self-regulation. So if I haven't ever felt safe as a child, I'm not going to feel safe in the world around me. And we call that a potential anxiety disorder.
Mm.
If I believe that I am terrible and there's no good thing in me, and even if I was raised in the church and I heard that I was created in the image of God, if my experiences said something different, I'm probably going to feel pretty helpless.
Yep.
Well, we call that depression.
Mm.
So we have personality disorders that are fed by this. If I am struggling with that kind of self-image and and struggling with just feeling this terrible worthlessness, well, God didn't create us that way. God created us in his image, and to know that we were knit together. He purposely put each one of us together. He also created us to know his love. But if our experiences as
Yep.
children, before we can reason, tell us something different, that's extremely painful. And we need to find a way to ease that
Yeah.
pain. Addictions,
Mm.
I mean, when we think of addiction, we think of drug and alcohol.
Yep.
I do see a lot of that.
Yep.
I walk with a lot of parents that are going through treatment and trying to figure out how to change those beliefs. Um, but it can also
But there's
be
so yeah.
it can also be other addictions. We also have an overuse of work to keep
Mhm.
us busy, to make us believe that we're doing something productive.
Yep.
Uh, People pleasing can be a problem. So then we've got that, but then the impact on the actual physical body. The number of individuals that I've worked with that have autoimmune disorders.
Mm.
Again, that is directly connected to trauma as as children, because our brain has to be on high alert to keep us safe. And so it actually, for a while, temporarily shuts down or reduces some of the other symptoms in our, or some of the other systems in our body.
Yep.
Well, if those physical systems are shut down too much, our body gets confused.
Yeah.
Shows up as autoimmune disorders, a lot of different things.
That's so good. It's so helpful. Now, I have a kind of a clarifying question.
Mhm.
With the people that you work with on a daily basis, did most of them have trauma as children? Can some of this come out of nowhere from trauma as adults? You mentioned ACEs. You might want to explain what that is.
Okay.
But yeah, what's the, I don't want to ask for like a hard ratio, but most of the families that you work with, did they have trauma as children? And did it kind of build and get to this point where as adults, now they're like, yeah, now it's kind of really coming out in all the different kinds of ways you just mentioned.
Short answer, yes. Yes. So the ACEs study was a study that occurred back in the 90s. It occurred in the 80s and was released in the 90s. And it said basically it came out of an event that happened in a major obesity clinic where
Mm.
a woman came into the clinic who struggled with major obesity, and the clinic was able to help her just drop the weight. She lost a couple 100 pounds
Wow.
in the course of a year. But then and she maintained that weight for a while, and she did great, and then all of a sudden in a 3-week period, she regained 37 pounds.
Mm.
And the people at the weight loss clinic had never seen this and what happened, and it came out eventually that she had been the victim of an incestuous relationship
Wow.
at the hands of her grandfather. And just before she regained those 37 pounds, she was sexually propositioned by a much older man. It
Wow.
was a trigger of
Yep.
her childhood trauma. So they did this research and it came out they studied 10 different types of adversity. Remember, adversity can be a good thing
Yep.
unless it's not experienced well. They
Yep.
studied 10 different types of adversity and they discovered that the more types of adversity that an individual experienced, the higher the chances that they would have struggles with mental health, that
Yeah.
they would have struggles with addiction, that they would have struggles with suicide attempts, that they would have struggles with um, physical health issues, heart disease, diabetes, COPD. All of these
Yep.
things were correlated with high levels of adversity in
Wow.
childhood.
Yep.
So the highest ACE score, this study was called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. The highest ACE score that you can have is a 10. Now, I don't give the ACEs evaluation or the ACEs assessment to my clients, my moms and my dads that I work with, but I do talk to them and I do hear their story. And in my mind, as I'm listening to their story, I go check,
Yep.
check, check. It is uncommon for me to work with an individual in the Families Together program who has an ACE score of less than 4.
Hmm.
I would say that in over 2 years, I've had one individual of all of the individuals that I've worked with, I've had one that I'm not sure that her ACE score was over 4.
Wow.
It was probably under that. I have had some with an ACE score of 8, 9, and 10, and that's not uncommon.
Wow.
So,
And
yes,
isn't the statistic about 2/3 of people have at least one? Am I messing that up?
I believe so, yeah. That sounds right. I don't have those stats in front of me
You
today.
can look, for those listening, you can Google that pretty quick, but
Mhm.
most of us have some sort of trauma. But yeah, I mean, you're working with the people who've had significant traumatic events throughout their life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, now in terms of mentoring, so Ronnie's kind of you've laid out, the types of people we have the privilege of serving. For the mentor, what qualities or skills are really essential for working with adults in hard places? I think you would agree none of us are born with these qualities or skills. They all need to
No.
be developed. We don't come out of the womb, ready 100%, to step into a tough situation to be a mentor. So we can learn these things, and we'll talk a little bit about training that Rhoni does, but what are the kinds of qualities and skills that are essential for an adult mentor?
I think the first important quality, skill, I don't know where this fits as far as those 2 words that you just gave me, but I think the most important thing is an understanding of the gospel.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not talking about you have to know the 4 spiritual laws and how to walk around
Yeah.
and the right words to say to lead somebody to Christ. That is part of the gospel and part of being ready to give an
Yep.
answer to anyone who's asked. But I just pulled up James 1:27
Hmm.
that says religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit the orphans and the widows in their affliction,
Hmm.
to keep oneself unstained from the world. So it's a combination. You visit them, you walk with them, you don't get pulled into
Hmm.
what they're doing. And who are the widows and orphans in today's society? Well, we talk about the orphans. Christian Heritage has talked about orphans for a long time, working with the orphans. Basically, these were the most vulnerable individuals in the society of the day.
Yep.
Who are the most vulnerable individuals in the society, in our society today?
Yep.
And so we've got the kids that are being raised in trauma, which
Yep.
are often single family homes, not always. There's a lot of single parent families that are doing amazing. But then the people that I am working with, again, are these individuals who were the most vulnerable 20, 30, 40 years ago,
Hmm.
that did not have somebody that
Hmm.
came alongside them. And we know that healing
Yep.
happens best in community. So there are these very vulnerable children that grew up without safe, healthy
Yep.
supports.
That's
And
good.
and
They're still vulnerable.
they're still vulnerable.
Yep.
And when we look through Psalms and Proverbs, when we look through, the New Testament, who is God? Who is God? Who are God's favorites?
Yeah.
Yeah, God doesn't
Yeah.
have favorites, but there is a group of people, the poor and the needy, the widow and the orphan,
Yep.
the brokenhearted. God gives us instruction to protect and to care for and to walk with these individuals. So the first thing that we have to have is an understanding of it's not my job to judge and and to figure out what's wrong with these people so I can fix them.
Yep.
It's to walk alongside them and
Yep.
love them and reach into the messy like Jesus did.
Yep.
He was constantly reaching out for lepers, the
Mhm.
untouchables,
Yep.
for the woman at the well, maybe not somebody that we would, you know, consider inviting home with us
Yep.
after church. Um, People that were demon possessed, the woman that was caught in adultery, all of these messy situations, and Jesus accepted and loved them and
Mm.
stepped into the messy with them. So an understanding, a clear understanding of what the gospel really is
Yeah.
and being willing to walk into that is probably the most
I love
important.
that. Yeah, the
Also,
gospel, I love that. Just the gospel's so much bigger than how do I share it in a nutshell so that somebody would, the light would click.
right.
And I think even as what you talked about earlier, entering in and connection and, healing happens in relationships is, you know, if I just do like a little drive-by evangelism and try to share the gospel with somebody, that's not going to really move them closer to Jesus.
Right.
But entering in and living it,
Mhm.
it will then open up the door for conversation and questions. And why are you doing this? Why do you love me? You don't get anything in return. And
Mhm.
that's when the power comes of being able to say, well, let me tell you about my relationship with God and what he's done for me and the compassion he showed. I can show you some passages in the Bible, what Jesus did, and I'm just trying to follow him.
Mhm.
I think that's when people in hard places will really be open to the message of the gospel because they've seen it lived out.
Exactly. Exactly. That's my experience. One other thing that I guess is really important, and it fits with understanding the gospel, is the ability to listen to an individual story
Hmm.
without judgment,
Yeah.
without this is how I'm going to fix you now,
Yep.
with complete acceptance and believe it.
Mm.
That goes back to the other
Wow.
question. That goes back to the other question that you ask, and that's, they're just drama queens. They're just trying to get attention. No, they're trying to have somebody believe their
Yep.
story because what seems unbelievable to me actually was their life. It impacted there's things that
Yep.
I hear, and it's like, I don't want to believe that. I don't want to believe that something this horrible could happen to somebody.
Yep.
But the most important thing that my families need is for somebody to believe them.
That's so important. And we kind of see it on social media and the internet. It's been a few years and even right now where stories come out about celebrities or pastors in two particular areas of traumatic events
Mhm.
is kind of spiritual abuse or sexual abuse.
Absolutely.
And there is always this reaction of that person couldn't have done that.
Right.
And
Right.
nobody believes the victim.
Mhm.
And I feel like maybe there's just a little bit changing in our culture and society where we're finally like, maybe we should actually listen and believe. But I know that there are some corners, especially in Christianity, let's be honest, where people are slow to say, no, I mean, if we really are sinful, then the people who have power over others really can do bad things. Whether you're a leader of a large group of people or it's a family situation
Mhm.
or an office
Absolutely.
situation, abuse really happens
It does.
and people really do suffer and they want someone to listen and to believe.
I wish that I could say that none of the parents that I work with have ever had any sexual abuse or any other kinds of abuse
No,
in a church.
but it
But
happens.
I can't say that because I have several of my moms that have
Yep.
experienced
Yep.
abuse of a variety of types of abuse
Hmm.
in a faith-based setting. And it's not just uh, in those other religions,
Yeah.
that
It's
that
ours.
that that aren't. Um, one of the moms that I worked with experienced sexual abuse in a church that had the same title as a church that I've attended for years.
Hmm.
Now, it wasn't my church, it was a church in a different town,
Sure.
but it was the same denomination, basically.
Yeah.
And so we do need to believe people when they're
Yeah.
telling a hard story.
Yeah. So as we're working with adults and maybe we're growing in these skills, I love the one that that just listen and believe. We're walking alongside. How do we actually measure the impact and the progress? And I would say in two things. One, for yourself as a mentor,
Mhm.
but in the person that you're serving and supporting and loving. How do we measure their growth? It's not like you can say, well, you're a 4 now. You're a
Right.
7.
Yeah.
You're a 10. You can't quantify it. So as you've worked with adults, how do you actually measure progress? Is it something you point to and just say, I can see it? We know it's incremental, but how do you go about looking for progress and growth?
I think, first off, you just made the point that it's going to be different. Everybody has different levels of trauma. Everybody has different areas that it has impacted in their life. And so there isn't a one size fits all gauge.
Yep.
But one thing I would say, and again, if you haven't listened to the two podcasts that James and Emma did, where they talked about the three pillars of trauma informed care, go
Yep.
back and listen to that. It's very important. But it's those areas, not only are we providing that care, but those are also areas that we look at to see if there's growth.
Mm.
So
Mm.
is this person feeling safer in their connections? So there's felt safety and there's connections, two of the three pillars. Um, have worked with a mom who just struggles. Her growing up world was very different than mine, and there was nothing about her growing up world that led her to believe that there's anybody safe in the world that she can trust. That's her reality.
Yeah.
So there was growth when she started feeling comfortable with me, when she started feeling safe enough to share her story or share specific struggles. And then after, working with her for probably 6 months, we had another employee start. And I wanted this mom to meet Susan, our new staff member. Nope.
Yeah.
Hey, would it be okay if I brought, because I need to show her what it's like to not feel safe,
Yeah.
and you can teach her this. Nope. Nope. 2 months into trying to get her to meet one new person, it turned out that I had promised to help her with something on a date that I had a family obligation, and I actually had to take the day off work. And with that, I said, I can't help you. But if this is a need that is really important to you, and I know it is, Susan can come. And I presented this during the first part of a contact that I had with her, and I was with her for about an hour and a half that day. And she was, I don't know if I need it that bad. I asked her again at the end of our time together, and I said, this is an option. I know you need to get this situation taken care of. It's an option.
Yep.
Well, Ronnie, here's the deal. She can come and she can take me to take care of this need, but I'm not going to like her. And I said, okay. That was progress. It was this big, but it was progress. Now we're another 6, 8 months down the road from that. And right now,
Yep.
she is more likely to reach out and call Susan than she
Mm.
is me.
That's beautiful.
She has built a new connection.
Yep.
She has felt safe now with another person in her life. And so that's, sometimes they're incremental changes. And then self-regulation is the other one. Self-regulation is a huge situation, a huge area of
Mm.
difficulty for the
Yep.
families that I work with. The majority of my time, the majority of my interaction with the moms that I work with is helping them to self-regulate. On Tuesday
Sure.
this week, I got a phone call from one of the moms that I've worked with for years who's moved out of state. And she had a trauma trigger and she was all over the place. And so we talked through it and I spoke truth, which is hard to hear when you're dysregulated.
Yep.
But again, somebody who she trusts
Yep.
can speak truth into her life. Got off that call. I got another call from a mom who was in a training, and there was something in the training that triggered something from a recent trauma. It wasn't a childhood trauma, it was a recent trauma.
Hmm.
And she was extremely dysregulated. And she called and she said, I just need to talk with somebody on my team and just ground myself a little bit. So we talked through that. Shortly after that, I get another call from a mom who's all of a sudden homeless with 2 kids
Mm,
and doesn't have any idea what her next steps are. Well, we can't process what the next steps are if she can't think logically.
yep.
So the first thing we did was we regulated.
Mm,
And so when we also see our moms learning to regulate themselves, and the one that called me specifically to check in, my goodness, in the last year and a half, she has made such huge strides in learning how to regulate herself. She was fairly regulated when she called me and just knew that she needed a connection to know what she was going
that's
through.
good. This
So
is a really,
those are the areas that we really look at to see where growth is happening.
yeah, that's really good. Really good stories, examples. I think having those tangible moments, and maybe if you're a mentor, you write those down. And
Mhm.
if you're being
Absolutely.
mentored too, you should write those down. I was
Mhm.
going to ask you, Ronnie, a question about boundaries. We're running out of time. Ronnie and I are actually going to do another episode later this fall on boundaries. I think
Mhm.
specifically about the holidays, if I'm not mistaken. But
Right.
I think we'll get to that later and just talk about, if you're with whether you're mentoring or even with your own family, how do you have boundaries?
Right.
So we'll actually end with this. Maybe somebody's listening and they're like, "Hey, I really am curious. I love adults. I love working with adults. Maybe someone wants to get involved and become a mentor."
Mhm.
Specifically with Christian Heritage, where do they start? What do they need to do to get started and get involved?
So the first thing you need to do is reach out. Reach out. And I think, James, you're gonna put something link or something on how
I
to
will.
reach out to me. And honestly, right now, as the agency grows and as the program grows, we have to make changes in how we do things. And we are about to implement one of these changes. So our first step today is you can reach out to me. You can talk to me. We'll get to know each other a little bit. Where are you coming from? What's your why?
Hmm.
Then we'll probably get you connected with another individual in the program or in the agency who will just ask you some more questions and get a
Yep.
feel for what your availability is and those kind of things. And then we have a training, and right now it's 5 weeks. It's about 3 hours each week. Sometimes we get done a little early, but it's about 5 hours, and we're going to do a deep dive into the impact of trauma. Then we're
Hmm.
going to do, we're going to talk about those boundaries that we're not talking about this morning, and how do you take care of yourself through this time.
Yep.
We're going to talk about how to connect with and how to build connection, and how to self-regulate
Yep.
so that you are able to co-regulate, and we just go through a lot of different topics that are very important in working with people that have been impacted by trauma.
That's great. Ronnie will get you ready. Our training team will get you ready if that's something you're interested in. Ronnie, this has been so good. Again, I just appreciate what you do. I know that Roy does and the Families Together team. You're amazing at it. Um,
Thank you.
and so thanks for joining us today and sharing some insights and wisdom.
Thanks for the invitation.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.